Albert LAI, CEO, Big Viking Games.
Hey, thanks for bearing with me today. This is going to be tough because I'm the last speaker, and I know I'm between you and the booze. So I will make this as interactive as you guys want. So if you guys have any question at any point in time, let me know. And I apologize in advance for the translator. I will be going pretty quick, but please try to keep up with me and forgive me if I use too much lingo. Okay, that didn't work. So who am I? I'm actually more of a serial entrepreneur than a game guy, but I've always loved games, and I've always wanted to try my hand at building games. But my background, just prior to starting Big Viking, was in starting Contagion, which, as some of you guys may know, is a enterprise-grade analytics platform that started off as focusing on Facebook games and subsequently has now moved into mobile games. So I was involved in starting that and running that for 4 years. Prior to that, I was a product guy. I was a founder and CEO of a company called BubbleShare. It was a photo sharing service. Prior to that, I started a few other companies. So my perspective on games may be a little bit different than yours, and I'm very excited to sort of get your feedback on some of the things that I've been thinking about. My co-founder, I met through Contagion, and he was actually an early angel investor in Contagion. He was an early pioneer in the Facebook game space. He was the creator of Yoville, which is the first successful MMO on Facebook. Also one of the very first acquisitions by Zynga in the early days of Facebook. He also created Fish World, which is the original fish tank game. His games have been played by millions and millions of players. So I'm kind of the generalist tech guy, and he's the actual game designer. So the company that we started about 2 years ago, we decided to focus on mid-core games, specifically mid-core games built with HTML5. And we made this bet because we thought at the time that it would be a good idea. And as you can tell by the title, it's hard for me to say at the moment whether or not it is a good idea. And time will tell, and I'll talk about some of the lessons that we've learned so far. So very quick tidbit on Big Viking. We are a 2-year-old company. We've got about 48 employees. We're completely self-funded by choice. We're profitable. We're based out of Toronto, Ontario, with another office in London, Ontario, which is 2 hours west of Toronto. And we run a number of games. There are some of our original titles. Our legacy games are built in Flash. All of our new titles currently are built in HTML5. We have an experimental title that we launched called Mechforce I'll be doing a case study on. We have another live game right now that is also in beta called Dark Heroes, which is a collector card game that we launched about a month ago, also built in HTML5. And we also have in production a turn-based RPG game, probably the most sophisticated one to date, or of any game actually built in HTML5 that we're aware of. And it's very much influenced by Final Fantasy Tactics and that genre of games, but built in HTML5, all for mobile and desktop. So all the games that we make are purely in HTML5 and are meant to be played on mobile devices and also on the web. So I'll talk about 3 things. Why HTML5, a case study in Mechforce, our first HTML5 experiment, and the lessons learned as a company and also in using a bleeding edge technology. So why HTML5? Before I get to that, I want to talk about the state of the market. As you guys all know, there's a lot of noise, a lot of clutter in the App Store and in various parts of the game ecosystem today. CPIs, cost per installs, are going up. Sophisticated competitors are coming onto the scene and getting more sophisticated. To us, games have become an art, a science, and also a big part of it is retailing. So it's art development and retailing using data and using a lot of what traditional retailers do. And the reason why I point this out is because I feel that for us to be successful, we need to be very rapid in the way that we look at each of these 3 circles. And one of the core values that we adopted was, and looking at how we wanted to build a company, we wanted to build a company that could iterate quickly, that could move faster than our peers. And the way that we wanted to do that was by looking at how can we most effectively collect data that is actionable and apply it back into the games that we have. And having come from a web background, we felt that building HTML5 would give us that ability. As you know, if you're not building in something like HTML5, it's very difficult to roll changes, large amounts of changes, very quickly into specifically the iOS environment, especially the iOS environment. We believe in moving very quickly and using data to our advantage. So going back to, again, why did we choose HTML5? We thought that HTML5 would dramatically de-risk game development, that would allow us to iterate games by having rapid updates, allowing our games to be played anywhere by writing it once, and then specifically having it so that you have an exact same game experience on a mobile device as you would have on a desktop device. And so when you move from game to game, you're not hindered by having to learn a new UI, nor are you hindered by having to worry about having to keep feature parity between mobile and desktop and not being able to have your mobile team move as quickly on feature sets as your desktop team because of the approval process and or whatever hindrances that you might have in moving something from mobile to desktop and vice versa. And then lastly, in theory, the idea of instantaneous play, being able to be completely frictionless in the way that you go and click on a link and be able to play immediately. So those are all great reasons why HTML5 in theory would be great and why it's great for cross-platform and all that. But I know a lot of you have looked at other options outside of HTML5, and so have we. So there's really three major solutions that we found that could do something similar. There's Air and Flash. At the time when we were evaluating Air and Flash, it has its own issues. It can't really be dynamically updated on iOS. And it's a closed platform and arguably a dying platform. Unity is fantastic. At the time, 3D was great. 2D was absolutely not as good. It still does require a plugin for the web. And again, you can't dynamically update as easily. Then there are accelerated HTML5 solutions. So basically, you're looking at writing something in pseudo HTML5 code that then gets compiled down to a system that is operated by either one of Game Closure's, LAI, or one of the competitors. And our issue with that was that it's not something that would actually work well when you're looking at porting it to the PC and web. It's not something that would work as well if you're trying to have full control of your platform, which was very important to us. And also, you can't quite update dynamically as we are able to, at least not without violating terms of service. I'm going to take a step back a little bit and just talk a little bit about how we see the world in terms of distribution and opportunities in distribution. So on a more macro level, we have physical distribution, which has evolved into digital distribution. As you all know, it's basically things like Steam, where there's an aggregator. There's a platform where you can just plug your game in, and the distributor or the platform takes their cut. And then came social distribution, where the ability to be able to have your players spread your game became much more prominent. So social distribution, we believe, is one of the key ways in which we will be growing our company. We see that peer-to-peer distribution to be extremely important. Yes, the viral channels are available today are not as powerful as they once were, but we still believe and we still have found that they can represent a large portion of our traffic. Now, the problem with existing social distribution today, and why a lot of people believe why Facebook, at least initially, was very aggressive with HTML5, was that there's a great experience that could be had if HTML5 actually did what it's supposed to do, which meant that when you get an invitation, you can go, right now, when you get the invitation, you end up going to the App Store. Then you go and click the install button. Then you download and you wait for the app. Depending on the size of the application, you may or may not be playing it right away. Then it falls into a cluster of icons that you may or may not find again. Then as you're doing that, as you're loading the game, once you find it again, you're patching and you're waiting for it to load. And at last, you get to play the game. So not the most frictionless way of distributing and getting a game into the hands of your players. Now, in theory, what could possibly happen is that you could skip all these steps and then eventually have the player play a version of the game on PC that may or may not be synchronized with your mobile experience, because again, this is something that actually we were speaking to Kabam about with Kingdoms of Camelot, which obviously had a huge user base when they were on Facebook. They were very successful on Facebook, but they couldn't move those players to the mobile device because they weren't able to iterate as quickly on the mobile side as they were on the website. A lot of other players that had a strong presence on Facebook also had the same challenges. So that was a big, big thing that we identified as something that we wanted to solve. So in theory, HTML5 allows you to just have basically an invitation, and then with a click of a button with a URL, no matter if you're on desktop or web, you can start playing right away. Now, that is great in theory, but I will share with you some of the experiences that we've had and how we intend on changing some of the challenges. So the high-level goals that we had for Mechforce, which is our experimental project, we wanted to have a native experience on mobile. We wanted to basically have something that visually felt exactly the same as a native application. The second thing was we wanted to have it playable in any mobile web browser. That's not to say that we will not ship it in a PhoneGap environment. In fact, our intent was to have it wrapped in a PhoneGap environment, which for those of you that don't know what PhoneGap is, it's essentially something that allows you to take a web browser and shove it into the App Store and have your game playable and downloadable through the App Store. But at the same time, we want it to be playable in any mobile web browser. And that actually poses a very, very difficult challenge, because a mobile web browser, unlike a desktop browser, has far, far more limitation in terms of processing power than a desktop PC. I'll get into that a little bit later. We also want to have it seamlessly playable across Facebook and mobile and essentially have one code base that allows us to deliver on both platforms. So when I say goals of having a native-like experience, we didn't want to glorify a website. And these are very successful games that managed to be incredibly popular in spite of the fact that they have very, very primitive user experiences that are essentially glorified websites. But we wanted to challenge ourselves and create something that looked more like this, something that had an isometric view and or just a much richer animated experience. So then we spent about 12 or 16 months building Mechforce. So Mechforce took about 3 times longer than we anticipated, primarily because of the lack of A, tools, and B, the maturity of the platform that we were building on. HTML5 is not a real standard. It is a standard that's interpreted by many players in very, very different ways, all of which are very buggy. So what caused enormous amounts of delays came from the changes that were happening in the browser, in the way that performance was degraded over various versions of Safari that had come out since we had launched the game. Now, just to back up a little bit and just I'll talk about some of the things that we did. We wanted to have customizable mechs. Even just the colorization of things that you take for granted, like colorization of armor, took weeks and months of optimization. So if anytime you're trying to do anything visual, it's incredibly difficult. And but that, having said that, now that we figured out how to do it in a performant way, it's a lot easier for us now. We wanted to do base building, so having an isometric view of the game was really cool. The problem, the challenge that we ran up against was when you have a view like this, you can only have very limited animations. Memory is a major issue in building HTML5 games on mobile. As you can imagine, there's a lot less memory on your mobile device than you have on your desktop device. The other one is we had missions. Missions was actually a relatively easy thing for us to do. There wasn't a lot that we needed. We had to build our own animation system from scratch, which took a very, very long time. It had a lot of limitations that went along with that. But again, these were sort of solvable problems that we were able to get through. And one of the bonuses was that, after building it for mobile, in all of our games that we build right now, they're mobile first, not because of any specific reason other than if it works on mobile, if it's performant on mobile, it will absolutely run on anything faster than a 286. And so that was a kind of a an interesting perspective and insight for us was that like if we're able to get anything working on a mobile device, it's incredible how smooth it'll run on any desktop. And since then we've started working on something much more sophisticated called Tiny Kingdom, which is very much influenced by the early Final Fantasy games. We've learned to do a lot more animation, a lot more effectively. Initially, we actually one of the pain points that we had was we didn't use Canvas, and we actually used the DOM for a lot of our early work. Since we started Mechforce, as an example, Apple has tremendously hindered the speed at which our CSS transforms were happening, and whereas Canvas had maintained its performance level. And so we spent months and months and months rewriting a lot of our code just because of something that was entirely out of our control. So on the one hand, we have massive control over our platform. On the other hand, the way that the browsers interpret HTML5 was something that was very challenging for us, that was completely out of our control. Having said that, the nice thing that's happening right now is that all the browsers are definitely getting better at providing higher performance and being more standards compliant across the board. So that has been very, very helpful for us. So just 3 major challenges in summary. Development, you can basically look at development and multiply that by anywhere between 2 and 10 times to do half as much. And there are some things that you're simply not going to be able to do. The second thing is discovery. While there is no easy discovery of HTML5 games without using the App Store, there are interesting things that are happening that I think will change the way that people look at HTML5 games. I'll get to that later. And payments, again, if you are playing this game outside the App Store, payments remains challenging in a mobile browser environment. Yes, you do get to keep the extra 30% and you get to use whatever monetization system you want, but it's still very high friction right now. But having said all that, I think there's a few things that are changing. Dev time is definitely getting down. It's come down a lot for us as we build better and better tools, and as there are better tools out there being built. And mobile performance naturally gets better as hardware gets faster. And as you've seen with the more recent hardware introductions from Apple, the devices are getting a heck of a lot faster, and we believe that will definitely help us in making our lives a lot easier in developing for the mobile device. Discovery outside the App Store will probably remain an issue for some time to come, but what allows us to overcome this is that it's using PhoneGap or something like PhoneGap as a stepping stone to get into the App Store definitely has helped, and it's been very effective for us. Rediscovery is an issue, but with more and more people using Facebook on a mobile device, finding it as a great acquisition and also re-engagement channel, that is something that can help us or anyone that's building a web-only HTML5 mobile game quite a bit. And I think that's also a trend that we're seeing just overall, having people that are becoming a little bit more comfortable bookmarking sites that they go to onto their desktop and treating that as an application as opposed to just a web page. And the third one is, while there's no standard payments systems right now that are really prevalent, we believe that this will change. This has got to change, and I think that Facebook and Google are obviously very well positioned right now to offer much more frictionless ways of paying in the open mobile web. So some of the pros and cons. So while you might think it's insane that we spent literally millions of dollars in R&D in trying to build HTML5 tools, there are, and with all the challenges that come with it, there are actually really good pros. Some of them are, for example, they're actually really good for 2D menu-driven games. You have a single code base to work from. As soon as I add something to my mobile device or my mobile game, it's immediately reflected on my desktop / web-based version, which is really useful for players that are engaged in the game heavily as a mid-core player, because we found time and time again from looking at other games and our own games that when people are playing and when the game is available seamlessly on both desktop and their mobile devices, things are a lot more interesting to a player, and they're much more likely to monetize more and play more, and engage more. Real-time updates across the platform. I mentioned that you could do aggressive A/B testing. You can we do an incredible amount of updates on our Dark Heroes game, which is a collector card game that allows us to introduce new features basically in real time. And the long-term opportunity, and this is the biggest thing for us, the long-term opportunity is that you have an alternate distribution channel where you can have somebody that takes a URL and be able to immediately play it without having to go through App Store, without having to download an app. The other thing that's kind of interesting beyond the whole 30% tax of the App Store is that you can embed these games inside of an existing website. So all the places where you see there's a Flash game portion on the desktop web, on the mobile web, anytime they go to the game section, that usually comes up as a Flash required page that essentially is up for grabs. So there are a lot of interesting alternative distribution channels that can be had. The cons are, as I said, you need to have very strong developers. You need to have very clever hacks to get around things, limited animations. You have to build your own tools right now. The tool chain is still relatively weak. And lastly, just going to share a couple of lessons learned. We decided to take all three of these risks. I would say pick one if you're starting a new project: tech, team, and design. The other thing is that I think, in the past we've seen a lot of glorified HTML5 websites. We are having more and more success making the game near native. Tiny Kingdoms is a game that we have in alpha testing right now, and players cannot tell that it's an HTML5 game. It looks exactly like a desktop or a native game. We're getting a lot of success in the collector card game right now. We're just in early beta right now. And again, card games are one of those games that just don't need a lot of processing power nor a lot of fancy graphics for it to be effective. And I think in the future, you're going to see very, very interesting near-native experiences. So with that, I'll wrap up. And if anyone has any questions or interested in contacting me, here are my contacts.
Questions for Albert? You blew their minds.
Hello, my name is Taras, and the question is, do you really have single code base for all different platforms, or should you put some code blocks like, if this is Safari, then I execute this code, and this is Chrome, I execute another one?
I lied. It's not 100% single code base, but it's fairly nominal changes right now. Having said that, Android is still a bit of a challenge for us because there's just so much fragmentation in terms of performance, and it's something that we're still dealing with. But the nice thing is that if we make a change, like a feature change on the web, it's immediately reflected on the mobile. Yeah, it's an immediate.
And another question. Have you write your own analytical platform for HTML5, or you can use other platforms?
I'm a little biased since I was one of the co-founders of Contagion, so we use
yeah,
Contagion. But yeah, I mean, it's no different really. HTML5, the tracking of HTML5 games is no different than any other games.
But the other games you should embed some SDKs, libraries, if you write in Java, for example. So in HTML5, it's similar to tracking statistics on websites. Yeah.
If you have a sophisticated analytics platform that can track events, it'll work exactly the same.
Oh yeah, thank you.
So when you talked about the browsers getting better at supporting HTML5, is that based on observed performance, or is that based on conversations that you're actually having with browser manufacturers, with the developers?
Yeah, so we're pretty close with a lot of the major browser developers, so Chrome or Google and Firefox, and even Microsoft, and all of them are heavily invested in making HTML5 work. They are incredibly excited about the possibilities of having more sophisticated games work. It's their way of competing and unlocking the stranglehold that Apple has. Having said that, by building the HTML5 doesn't prohibit you from distributing in the Apple ecosystem. So, really the only downside is that you've got to figure out how to make the performance work.
Other questions? All right then. Thanks, Albert.
Thank you.